will join us when she's able. So I will call the Town of Essex Select Board meeting for Monday, October 5th to order. Are there any agenda additions or changes, Evan?
None.
Okay. If you are not speaking, can you please mute, because we are getting some background. Oh, it's gone. Wonderful. Okay, Vince, sorry. Thank you. Okay, are there any consent agenda items that any board member would like to bring forward as a business item? I believe, Andy, you might have one.
Yeah, I'd like to pull the minutes out, please.
So item 6E, the minutes for September 21st, we'll bring them out and make them a business item 5D. So that's a change. Anything else? Okay, then can I get a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I move that we approve the agenda as amended.
Thank you, Vince. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the amended agenda, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. We are now at public to be heard. And this is the section of the meeting when residents who wish to speak to the board can do so on items that are not currently on the agenda. And with apologies for last week's technical difficulties, apparently that was a nationwide Microsoft issue. We seem to be back in business and chat seems to be fully operational. So if you wish to speak, please either raise your hand by doing so in your toolbar, which is either at the center of the screen or in the upper right, or you can indicate that you wish to speak by putting a message to us in the chat. I see Annie Cooper wishes to speak. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair Haney.
That person. Okay, if you're not speaking, please hang on. I found it.
There's, you got it?
Got it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. It is with it. I'm sorry, there's a sound coming from me though. There's a great deal of heart behind what I'd like to say, and I'm saying it with 1,000,000% of respect for the position of the entirety of the select board. So I'm hopeful that as I convey my feelings, that they are heard as genuinely and authentically and kindly as I intend. I think, thank you for hearing me. I think that within the, well, I know that within the complications of our town and village and how that is.
See what happens. I don't know. There's something funky.
It's very hard for us as residents, and I can only speak for myself when I sat on the select board, and thank you all for your respect of me and for me as I navigated that. It's easy to see the village and the village residents as overseen by the trustees, and those who live outside of the village in that part of the town to be overseen by the select board. And the complication further deepens now that the ballot for merger has been placed on the village ballot for November, but not yet on the entirety of the town ballot. The thing I'd like to speak to today is that I see this moment in time as the last conversation that we are going to have about merger. Our town cannot sustain this as our speaking point forever. It's not appropriate. We're smarter than that. We're better than this. We're more effective and efficient than this. While I'm saying that, I'm imploring you as the select board and us as a town to recognize that half of our town residents, or basically half, are going to vote now in November about merger. I would say to the select board that it is in our best interest as a community if the select board were to speak to the half of the town residents who reside in the village who are going to be voting about this conversation, and put yourselves out there as advocates for learning and knowing what you might want to vote for, because we've worked very hard as a community towards this merger discussion. I know the kind of time Andy has put in. I know the kind of time Elaine has put in. I know the kind of time Pat has put in. I know I've seen Dawn at every meeting that was not select board, listening and paying attention and learning about, and I'm so impressed. And Vince also. So I'm asking, and I'm going to cry, I'm sorry. I'm asking that you recognize the enormity of the value of your voices in this discussion right now, because you're not a silent piece of this. Because half of your it would sound great if I could say that word. Yep.
Constituents.
Thank you very much, Elaine. I got embarrassed. Half of your constituents are voting on something that is going to deeply affect what happens next. And it can't be that you guys, well, sorry, I want to be respectful. In my opinion, it's important for you to speak to our community and not wait until the select board puts it on the ballot, because that's half of us. And I took a great amount of time to study everything. There was a moment where I was like, oh man, separation might be a good idea. And I feel strongly that I have looked at this from every angle. And I'm confident that whether or not you agree with me doesn't matter, but the fact that this should be the final time that we have this conversation means that the village should vote yes to merger, so that we can put that ballot out for a fair vote for the entirety of the town. If the village votes yes to merger in November, that puts, for probably the first time maybe, the entirety of the town at an equal vote in March. That every resident's vote counts once, and we're all voting in the same way. What that means for the draft charters, I can't touch with the 10-foot pole right now, but the impact is enormous, and we're looking at making sure that this is not our story anymore. It can no longer be our story that we are this divisive community that can't decide whether to merge or separate or what. This needs to be the final, this needs to move us along. And I think you agree. I'm sorry to talk so long. I see that I have gone too far.
Okay.
Thank you.
Annie, thank you very much. I see also that Lorraine Zaloom wishes to speak.
Hi, everybody. It's Lorraine Zaloom. Just a quick question about the racial sensitivity training. I understand it looked to me like there was a few trustees that couldn't attend, and I think there might have been a scheduling conflict. Were those sessions recorded? And if they were, would people that didn't get to attend, that are representatives, be able to go? And if they did go through the recording, would we be able to learn that they had attended? And also, do we have an opportunity as well to experience what was recorded or through the recording as well?
Thank you, Lorraine. Evan, I'm going to let you answer that. Evan, your hand is up. I'm hoping you can answer.
My bad. I did it to myself, Pat. And I'll turn on my video.
Camera's off too.
Yeah, here we go. Those were not recorded. It was on the advice of our consultant. People wanted their training. They needed the training, but they wanted to have the ability to speak freely without their words being played back.
So the three attendees that were able to, well, the three trustees that were unable to attend, I assume it was a scheduling conflict, and was there any workaround for them that couldn't attend? I think George didn't go, Dan and
I think she's asking if the folks who didn't attend would be able to have take advantage of the materials without having been at the training.
I understand there's three trustees who did not attend.
Well, we do have materials for them. There was homework given in advance of the trainings. of the each night session. So those materials remain available.
Thanks, Lorraine. Betsy Dunn.
Thank you, Elaine. I have a question for you. On Saturday, I think it was, let me just look at the date on this front porch forum that, it's going to be the last thing on it, isn't it? On the front porch forum on Saturday, there was a note out by Tammy, by Tammy Getchell, and it spoke to the merger, but it was in many ways not correct information at all. Did you see it?
Yes, I did see it. I didn't see a problem with it.
It's very concerning to me because on town meeting day in March, the Essex town government will mail a similar ballot to the voters, the town voters. We may not have the same merger document that the trustees have, and that would not be the same vote that they took. It wouldn't mean because we passed it and they passed theirs that it passes, because they didn't vote on the one we had. They have to vote on the same one. There's so many inaccuracies in this, and I think it needs to be addressed.
Well, that is the purpose of our work going forward, Betsy. So thanks for calling our attention to that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else that wishes to speak on items that are not on the agenda? Lorraine, go ahead.
Yes, to what Betsy was saying, it looked to me like it was drafted by, well, I would assume Evan drafted it because it was, I believe she works for Evan. But it looks like it's coming from the town too. Whereas really, when you read it, it looks like it only speaks to what the village is voting on. So it's just really confusing for people outside of the village to read that, because to me, it's disinformation as well.
So I see Greg's hand up and I want him to address things, but I do want to make it clear, disinformation is not what's going on here. We are not intentionally misleading the community on anything. So it is really confusing because there is a vote in November on the village side. There may be a vote in March. The board has not approved that yet. And it will be a similar, not the same, charter. So yes, word choice probably could have been a little bit more succinct, and the way it was written maybe could have been a little bit clearer, and we will continue to work on that, and we really appreciate that feedback. Go ahead, Greg.
I just want to say Tammy's been working with the village trustees to try to get the information out, and because they have a vote in less than a month, they are trying to get information out to the public as quickly as possible. We are certainly open to feedback. So Betsy, Lorraine, anybody who's watching or listening from home, if you have comments or thoughts, please feel free to send them to me. You can copy Tammy on there as well, and we can try to revise and update that information as best as possible, working with the trustees. But the goal is to let people know that there's a vote coming in less than a month, and to try to inform them about what it's about.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak that hasn't already? I see Irene and then Brad.
Hi, it's Irene Renner. I have a couple things to say, but I will also tag along, if I may, to Tammy Getchell's Front Porch Forum. As a member of staff, it's imperative that she not make careless mistakes. And to say that there's a vote coming in March when a vote has not been warned for March, to me, is unacceptable. If staff cannot be counted on, whether the trustees are informing them or not, to put out correct information, we have a huge problem.
Thank you.
As happens very often with these votes, we're told that there's been misinformation. Well, when staff starts out providing misinformation, we do have a problem.
Thank you for your comments about our staff, Irene. What are your other topics that you'd like to discuss?
I'd like to ask that the select board slow this merger train down. It's been a whole year since I had to sing to folks at the high school, in the cafeteria, begging you to hang on, wait for the survey results. look at options besides merger. And we've heard from the chair of the select board that separation was considered and dismissed, which it absolutely was not by the government subcommittee. We spent about 10 seconds, as I recall, saying, yeah, well, we don't want to separate. That's just not an option. And then we moved on and we considered many other flavors of merger and combination, but we never gave separation any consideration. And of course, we didn't at all consider separate and share because it hadn't been invented yet 2 years ago. It was only come up with a year ago by Ken Signorello. So I would ask that the select board take a break, take a pause, and spend some time looking at all those incredible numbers that Sarah Macy generated and presented to you last week, because there's a lot there. And separation offers more to the town outside the village and more to the town inside the village than merger ever could. I would go to Annie's comment finally and ask that when she talks about a fair vote on merger in March, I would like to back up and say 3 years ago in March, a number of town outside the village residents came to a all-day select board meeting and begged for representation going forward. And yet there were no people at the merger table representing the town outside the village, of which the town population is approximately half. So please don't tell us we're having a fair vote on a merger plan that half the town has had zero input in. Thank you so much.
Brad Kennison.
Thank you. A question for Greg, I think. I saw his post in the front page forum about the listening session that's coming up on the 7th, 14th, and 21st of October. And they're seeking feedback on public safety, policing, and racial justice. And it appears that the first meeting is for only BIPOC folks and no one else. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The first session is an affinity group for Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Okay. And how are you paying for that?
It's approved by the select board. It's I think 80% of the cost of the project is coming from the police budget through a vacancy they have through some savings, and the other 20% is split equally, 10% from the select board budget and 10% from the manager's budget.
Right. I guess I misspoke. You're paying $50 for everybody that attends. So where is that coming from?
It's coming from the project budget.
So the $25,000 that was approved?
It might, yeah. The $50 each will be above and beyond that, but same breakdown of costs.
So it's above and beyond the $25,000 that was approved for the project.
Correct. I think Evan, I can't remember, it was $2,000 we made available.
$2,000 is budgeted for this.
Yep.
Are those sessions recorded?
No, they're not going to be recorded. There will be a report coming to the select board once they're done. The reason we're doing it was we had some feedback to try to attract some more people, to try to offer the stipends for that. It's partially to try to attract some more people. It's partially to cover the cost for people who might have childcare or have to give up some time from work, to reimburse them for that time. We're also making some available for a first come, first serve for the other two listening sessions as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Andy Lane, can I just respond to something that was said earlier too? I just want to clarify, Tammy is absolutely unequivocally not to blame for anything that was put out. As I said before, if you have concerns or take offense to something, please direct that to me. We can work with it to see if we need to clarify anything or correct anything. But Tammy is absolutely not at fault. If you take issue with something, please, that's on me. That's on Evan. Do not blame Tammy for that. She was the messenger. That was it.
And I'll add to that. In our system, we get so many posts from Front Porch Forum. You get listed as the poster, but you may not be the author. And in this case, Tammy is just the person who posts for the village and the town, because the account and the access is under her name, but she's not the author of any of these materials. That was done by the village trustees in consultation with themselves, then asking me to have her post it. So, Lorraine, I saw your comment. In fact, what we talked about is having a disclaimer that Tammy is not the poster. She is just a staff person who was asked to post it for whether it's the village or the town. It's just the way Front Porch Forum works.
I appreciate that clarification. It's unfortunate we need to even discuss it in that way. So Brad, I'm not sure if you put your hand down already. Betsy, and then Irene, and then let's move on.
Okay, thank you very much, Elaine. And again, coming back, yes, if Tammy wasn't the author and the trustees were the author, it is much more concerning to me because the last paragraph, the last little two sentences are, if the Essex Junction voters say no to merger this November, the Essex town government will not send out ballots in March. There will be no merger. The village and the town governments and all the services they provide would not continue as they are. This is a bullying tactic. This is awful. We have to have a statement in Front Porch Forum so people realize that that is not true. If they don't pass it this November, I'm assuming that as we're working on the merger, they will jump in and let's work on the merger that people will like. This is bad. I really want to see something happen about this. We need to make a statement. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you, Betsy. Okay. Pat, go ahead, then Irene, then we need to move on.
Patty or Pat?
Pat Murray.
Oh,
Patty, are you waving? Are you
Yes.
not able to indicate that you need to speak in any other way? Because I can't see you.
Oh, okay. I'm waving.
Okay, sorry.
No, wait, Patty, do you not know how, Patty, do you not know how to use the chat or the raise
I
hand?
don't want to chat.
That's how you need to let us know if you want to speak, Patty. If I can't see you waving into the camera, but I can see you if you say, I want to say something in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
That's okay.
Okay. Well, I'm talking now. Do you want me to keep going or not?
Sure, you're on. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. So the only thing I'm going to say is I have a problem with any at-large representation where it's not even. And that reason is a slim majority of voters have the power, in my eyes, to deny representation to all others. It makes the rights of these other voters, if we're all supposedly one town, diluted, which is the 14th and 15th Amendment. But what I want to get to is basically, I want you guys to talk about at some point the police, because, and if we were to separate, and, if we pay for police, I just wanted to say one thing that I would like to ensure that we have a police force that is racially diverse, better trained to understand racial justice issues, and held accountable for racially disparate treatment and racially discriminatory conduct. And that includes, sex, women and men. And I think the truth about our local government is that control should be not just criminal law, but also policies that are crucial for all our civil rights. And we have to have equal representation. And we have to talk about separation because you guys only have a month to decide. You haven't talked about separation. I mean, it at all. I want to hear your voices, not Sarah Macy's. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Pat Murray, then Irene.
Wow. I'm very disappointed with the public, to be frank. I'm going to be frank. I don't believe that any of the instances of attacking our staff are at all justified. And it has been repeated. I believe that the instances and the sentences that are getting pulled out of here are wild mischaracterizations. The instances of there not being a vote in March, I think, boils down to simply the fact that if a village vote does not pass in November, then at that point, the procedure would be that a vote has to pass both the village and then a combined vote of the entirety of the town itself. It is a mechanism issue, and it is not anything related to specificity of whether the trustees are going to jump on board of or getting involved in anything along those lines. It is simply a mechanics issue. So again, I appreciate bringing this issue, but Greg has mentioned several times already that if people do have suggestions about how that front porch forum issue was raised, to bring it up to him. But I think that continued mischaracterization of this is not helping us this evening. I believe that Greg has said what needs to be said around that issue.
Thank you, Pat. I'd like to remind the audience that the chat needs to be only for people indicating that they wish to speak, and we're not having conversations in the chat because it needs to be in the public forum. Irene, okay, I see Annie too. So Irene, Annie.
Thank you. Maybe I can provide a little context for folks like Pat who are newer to the select board. The thing that I guess bothers me most hearing that it was the trustees behind it is they appear to be making policy through front porch forum. I have heard no board member at any public meeting say that if this vote fails in the fall, that there will be no merger vote, there will be no merger come March. So I think it's very concerning to me to have things announced like that through a staff member by a trustee or all the trustees or a majority of the trustees, because that's not the place to make policy or to make those announcements. Some of you may recall that I offered to George Tyler and the rest of the trustees recently my expertise and my institutional knowledge, because I would rather have these things critiqued behind the scenes before they go out into public and before they do offend people. I have yet to be called upon, but the offer still stands. If Tammy Getchell or any other member of staff or any other public servant or any other member of the public is curious how this fits into the merger puzzle and to the history that we have around trying to consolidate things, I'm available. Please call or email or text me. This particular incident, and I'm almost done, reminds me of when George Tyler personally, in a public meeting in the fall of 2016, threatened the voters of the town and village that if they did not pass the special taxing district for recreation in December of 2016, the rec departments would never merge. Within 2 years, those two rec departments moved in together. So I'm not happy about idle threats. I'm not happy about policy making through front porch forum. And I really wish that everyone here could take a step back and put into context the fact that this misinformation happens every election, and it very often comes from the people that it should absolutely not come from, whether it's staff or elected officials. Thanks so much.
Ann Cooper.
Thank you for the time. I'm going to ask if there's a way in future, not tonight, that we can maybe discuss not publicly saying the names of staff members. I'm embarrassed as a resident that we are publicly attacking any staff members. I appreciate Greg's heart saying I'll you know, it's just unacceptable and inappropriate. There's no reason why an email or a letter can't be sent. And so maybe we can put some kind of rule in place where we please, it's a small town, even though we're growing, and it's really inappropriate for these very hardworking staff members to have their names bandied about in public discussion. Also, I'm very confused by the anger connected to any of this, because I feel strongly that our community can comfortably and reasonably decide whether to merge or separate. Thank you all so much for so much time this evening during public to be heard.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to business item 5A. Interview and potential appointment, Conservation and Trails Committee. I believe Grace Vinson has been patiently waiting in the audience. Would you like to come forward and talk with us about the Conservation and Trails Committee?
Definitely. Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, there you are. Thanks for being here, Grace.
Yeah, of
and
course.
Thanks for stepping up to volunteer. We have your letter of interest in our packet, so I'm going to open it up to select board members to talk to you, and please feel free to tell us now what you're thinking and why you decided to step up.
Yeah, so my partner and I moved to Essex a couple of years ago now. We live on 14 acres, and I feel extremely grateful for that. And my work at the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission has really made me want to be more involved in municipal government. You know, I moved to Essex a couple of years ago, but I haven't really gotten involved in the community. And especially during COVID, I think it's really important to get connected and stay connected to your community. So I thought this would be a great opportunity. When I saw the ad in Front Porch Forum, and it looked interesting, so I wanted to volunteer.
Terrific, thank you. Board members, do you have any questions for Grace?
Yeah, how do you, this is Vince Franco, by the way, how do you use the trails in Essex, or how would you use the trails in Essex if you use them?
Yeah, so we have 2 dogs. We walk on our property a lot because it is 14 acres, so there's lots of room, but we also go to the area parks a lot. And I mean, I definitely want to learn more about the trail system. That's something that I'm not as familiar with. So that part of the Conservation Committee's work definitely interested me. Especially, I think I saw in a recent meeting minutes that you're working on mapping the trail system, and that's definitely something that I would want to be involved in. That would be really cool.
Nice.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Vince, did you have more?
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank her.
Thank you.
Okay, Grace, have you been to any of the meetings yet of the committee?
Oh, no, I haven't, but I'm pretty familiar with municipal government from my professional experience. So.
Okay, so I was wondering if you had any thoughts about anything unique that you would bring to the group that might not already, be present.
Yeah, I do have my certificate in floodplain management. I got that a couple years ago now. So I think I would bring some professional experience, and, I'm familiar with reading flood maps and talking about floodplain management and, the importance of conserving floodplains and wetlands and stuff like that. I think that's something unique I would bring. And I think that I bring a mix of knowledge of municipal government and also knowledge of natural resources and floodplain management, for example. I went to UVM, I graduated in 2014, and I got my degree in environmental studies, but concentrated in policy. So I bring a mix of like the policy and the government side and also the natural resources side.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Pat or Dawn?
No, I don't have anything specific. Grace, you seem eminently qualified, so
Thank
glad
you.
to have you submit an application.
Thanks.
Grace, what do you have any ideas for what you might want to do while you're on the committee? Any thoughts about the future of our trail system?
I don't have any specific thoughts about the trail system, but I think something I would want to be involved in is like, I saw some stuff in the meeting minutes about like grants and projects that the committee kind of has ownership over. And since I bring, experience in grants and project management, I think that would be interesting to be involved in. I've helped towns with grants and project management, but I've never been on the town side of it, so that would be cool.
Nice.
Like the Emerald Ash Borer grant, for example. I think they're working on that right now. I know things have probably changed since COVID happened, but
right.
Yeah.
Andy, did you have more questions?
I did not. I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay.
But I think Vince's is up.
Vince is up.
So I have one question, and it's just because I'm a mountain biker that I ask this, but have you worked with Zemba or any of the local mountain biking chapters at all in any of your professional experience?
It's funny that you asked that. So my boyfriend is an avid mountain biker, and I have been looking, like I started today, looking at mountain bikes to purchase. I really want to get into mountain biking. I really like road biking, but I've been wanting to get into mountain biking more. So my answer is no, but it's something I'm interested in, and I want to get into it more. Buy a bike. If you have any recommendations, let me know.
I don't know. Go to OG, have them fit you. They'll do a good job. There's no bike shops in Essex, or I would send you there.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Vince. Dawn, did you have any questions, or are you all set? Not seeing, okay. Oh.
I'm good, Elaine, if you can hear me.
I can. That was also a test to see if I could hear you. Great. Grace, do you have any questions for us?
I don't know if you would know this, but I guess I'm interested in like the priorities for the next year for the committee. I think, you know, mapping the trail system maybe would be one of those, and then maybe the Emerald Ash Borer grant, because I think that might be closing out soon. But I was interested if you have that information off the top of your head, what else they would be working on in the next year.
I don't, but Greg might.
I do not, but I will reach out to Darren Shibler, who's the staff person for Conservation and Trails, and I will ask him to be in touch with you.
Great. Yeah, he was also in my class at UVM.
Oh, okay, great. Yep, and Darren started on the Conservation and Trails Committee and eventually came to work for Essex too. So.
Oh, cool.
But I'll ask him to reach out to you.
Great.
Evan?
I do know that they are working on
a single trail.
On a what?
Oh, sorry. Never mind. I was making a joke. Sorry about that.
Okay. I know that they are working on several trails and how they connect into each other in a future plan, also with how they will connect into the village as well as through the town. There is a project that's out on the Route 15, which would connect to Colchester, past the Lowe's and the Fort. They're involved in some of that planning. And then all the, a lot of, we affectionately call it the blinky flashy lights, at where you see people who want to cross. You push a button. We have one outside of 81 Main. You push the button and it blinks and alerts motorists. So all requests for those go through that committee as well.
Okay.
For recommendation. So they do a lot of that. Also, they are working on Emerald Ash Borer. We did get a $15,000 grant for tree removal and also a recommendation of replacement species.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for Grace? Vince, is your hand up a leftover?
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay. All right, well, Grace, thank you for your time and for stepping up to volunteer. It sounds like you are extremely qualified to be on this committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Greg, can you remind me there are 2 openings?
Sorry, I'm trying to write down an email right now and had to jump back to this. That sounds right. Let me check the packet. And yes, two seats are open right now. There's one term that expires June 30th, 2023, and there's another one that expires June 30th, 2022. And they've both been open for the better part of the year. No, we've had some interest from some people, but I believe Grace is the only one at this point who's been able to come forward and interview.
Okay. And is it staff's preference or the committee's preference that we fill this seat right away, or are we waiting for more people to step up?
And Elaine, it's been opened, both of those seats for the better part of this year too. So yeah, I think they'd be Conservation and Trails would be happy to get an additional person on board if the select board is ready to make the appointment, whether tonight
Right.
or in the near future.
Okay, thank you. So Select Board, we have the ability to make the appointment this evening. I don't know that we need to go into executive session, but if you wish to, we can certainly do that.
I don't
Doesn't look like
feel
any-
any need. No, I'll make the motion. I'll move to appoint Grace Vinson to the Conservation and Trails Committee for the term ending in 2023.
One second it.
Thank you, Dawn. Any further discussion?
Quick question, did we also approve the other person who applied? Or were we waiting? I can't remember.
We approved them as well. There were 3 openings total, and I think we approved one 2 weeks ago, or maybe it was 4 weeks, but
Further back, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So there'll be one vacancy left.
excellent.
Okay.
Thanks for that reminder, Vince. Okay, we have a motion on the table and a second to appoint Grace Vinson to the Conservation and Trails Committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Congratulations, Grace.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you.
you. Have fun on the committee.
Thank you.
Grace, you'll be contacted by Darren, and he'll get you all set up.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. I'm gonna hop off.
Sounds great. Thank you, Grace.
Bye.
Okay, next item of business is discussion about draft merger charter, item 5B. So in your packet, you received 2 versions of the charter, a clean copy that was what the trustees agreed to, their final version, and then a marked up copy of the trustees' version with a handful of edits that came from our board. Excuse me. So what I'd like to do this evening is just review those edits that are in the packet, and just the substantive ones. There's a couple capital letter issues and spelling and stuff. We're not going to worry about those. But I'd like to just go through each one of them and make sure there aren't any additional questions of the board, if that's all right with all of you. Okay. So the first one is section 106. It's on page 4. And that is the, let me get there. So that is making sure that the representation model is 6 members, and it removes any edits that have to do with the at-large member. So that's section 106, as we discussed at our last meeting. Is everyone on board with that? Good with that? I'm assuming. Okay. The next one of substance is section 112, which is about water sewer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did have a question about 106 there.
Sorry, Andy.
In section D, it says that there needs to be a review within 3 years, and I thought we had changed that to a 10-year review of the wards. I know we changed it somewhere else in the document. I think we've made it inconsistent with this section. That's my point. And you can leave it that way if you want, but just pointing out an inconsistency.
I believe, Andy, that you're right. There is a section that talks about redistricting in the event of population change to comply with census figures and assure proportional representation. I do recall, though, I think, Vince, this was something that was of importance to you, that you wanted to make sure, and others agreed, that after 3 years of this new representation model, it would be examined. Isn't that my understanding? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think this section that I was concerned about was more about the review of how our governance structure works after merger, rather than here's how we adjust the wards, every 10 years. Does that make sense, Andy? Do you want to put some clarification to that?
But the language here talks about looking at the wards. It doesn't say is the form of government working. At least that's not the way I read it, but
Okay.
others could interpret it differently, I guess.
I think that in the interest of maintaining the similarities between the two charters at this point, that this paragraph, I'm assuming that such a commission would, in addition to reviewing the population, which is as it's mentioned in 106D, that they would also be looking at the form of governance.
But that's an assumption. You just used the word assumption.
I did, you're correct. Greg?
Greg, you're muted.
Sorry. The trustees debated whether or not to keep this in as well. They ultimately decided to keep it in. Evan can expound after me too if there's more reasons, but one of the ones I remember is that the census is expected to come out within the next year or so and just show what the different breakdown is between town and village. So they thought it might be a good opportunity to take a look and basically confirm that the populations are roughly equivalent or to reassess if need be. And Andy's right, later in the charter it does talk about taking a look at the population breakdown and if change, no more than once every 10 years if changes need to be made.
I'll also point out that there is a phrase in there in the 5th and 6th line that says, having regard to an equal division of population and other considerations deemed proper. And I think that's where the conversation about the governance model might fit in. Is that satisfactory, Pat?
This may also be, and apologies because it was obviously a number of months ago when we first started looking at it, but I think my preference or was originally for smaller wards. So I think that as a nod to that, there might have been talk about making or creating, 4 or 5 wards based on smaller neighborhoods. And I think that the idea of having a shorter time frame rather than just the every 10-year based on population was to put this in here to see whether or not the new form of government, after 3 years, if it was adequate, if it was functional, or if the new merged community wanted to explore something different with the size of the wards that they were based off of. So, again, that's how I read this, and that's why I was happy to keep this in here. But again, it was quite some time ago, so I'm not sure if anyone took a different interpretation from that or not. But that's how I read it, and I was glad to have it.
Thanks, Pat.
So I raised the question because it would look like an inconsistency between 3 years and 10 years in another part. So I'm not objecting to anything else. Just making that clear.
Okay, I appreciate that, Andy. Thank you. If there aren't any other further comments on 106, we'll move on to 112. We'll wait for Greg to get there. So an additional sentence was tacked on to the end of this paragraph. The select board may amend or establish new water and sewer rates as necessary and practicable. Andy, I'm just wondering if we could talk about this from your perspective, because I believe this was a concern that came from you. And I want to understand whether that sentence addresses that concern or not.
Well, it says also in the middle of that paragraph, cost specific to each system will be charged solely to the user base within the boundaries of that system. So it's specifically saying that the costs have to stay within each of the individual systems. But then later, but you're making it seems to me to become inconsistent by adding that last, sentence in there, because then you've got a requirement that the costs stay where they in each of the system, but then an option to change it. So I'm just confused by this whole thing. Why it's part of the charter and not just a discussion outside of it. I don't know.
I'm trying to flip back to see some comments from a previous email about this, and I think that this section, oh, here we go. Sorry, my apologies. Okay, so that's not what I was looking for. The select board can set rates at any point in time. So if this sentence is confusing, it does not need to stay in there. The fact that each system is going to be charging its costs to its own users is the way it exists now.
Mhm.
And if it needs to be changed, that's something that the select board can change going forward. So I'm not sure whether this section needs any changes at all.
But if the charter explicitly says that the costs will stay within each of the systems as defined in this paragraph, then future interpretation of that could say that for now and forever, that those costs will stay that way. My concern is limiting future action by the select board due to interpretation of the language that's there, right?
Well, future select boards could change the charter.
Yeah, so yes, and we could change the charter now too if we wanted to, but I'm getting all this pressure not to make any changes because it will then disagree with the trustees' version.
Let's
And
not
that-
make
and that upsets me.
let's not make that the arbiter of our discussions tonight.
Please, yeah, I know, but
Trustees
that's
moved
the
on.
email that you sent me not too long ago, earlier this afternoon, that was explicitly stated that that was a priority to not make the two versions different. I'm sorry, I'm getting upset here.
No, that I did not state that that was a priority. I said that was a factor in it, but it's not a priority. The trustees made a decision and moved on. We were not done. Inherent in that situation is the fact that we're working on it now. There's going to be changes.
The other,
Ideally,
okay, so I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
thank you. Ideally, we will only get down to the significant differences, which was basically the representation. Other differences we will talk about tonight. Ideally, if we can avoid it, let's try to keep them as similar as possible. I don't think we can avoid that, but if we can, let's try. That's all I'm trying to say. This paragraph is the way the water and sewer system works now. It's assumed that going forward, if it's approved and all the approvals occur, that in the next year and the following fiscal year, it's probably going to stay the same. Those two systems, that the system is going to work exactly the same way. At some point in the very near future, the new select board could make changes. It could be all of us. Who knows what the membership will be at that time. I think if we're dealing with a system that is existing now and is working fine, and we can carry it over into the next iteration of our government and then make changes to it as we need to in the future. I think if we agreed to do that, we wouldn't have to add that extra sentence at the bottom and we could just leave that paragraph be.
I don't agree, and I'm sorry. The way I read this is, yes, the select board can change the rates within each system. It does not say that it can make the rates common across both systems. I don't see that anywhere in this paragraph.
So that's implicit in the powers of the select board, regardless of what the charter says.
No, it's not, because the
can
charter
change the charter.
explicitly says the cost will stay within each of the systems. So you don't have to make me happy. I can just not agree.
Okay. Our goal is to get consensus on everything, and I don't want to leave someone behind because of either a semantic difference or a philosophical difference. Are you saying that that last sentence in blue is not necessary?
I'm saying it's inadequate. If it says maybe it needs to say at the end, including the possibility of a equal rate across both systems or something like that,
I would
because
think as necessary and practicable includes that.
it does not, because up above it says costs specific to each system will be charged solely at the user base within the boundaries of that system. That, to me, if I'm looking at this charter 10 years from now, says costs have to stay. We can't make them the same.
Board members, what are your thoughts?
I'm looking at possible interpretations, not our current interpretation.
John, did I see you on mute?
I did. I was wondering if you go down, because it says any new costs incurred after the effective date of the charter of the merged municipality will be borne by all users. Does that mean that everybody will then pay the same rate?
Evan, could you give us the walkthrough?
Okay. And I want to take a little walk back. I think the reason why this is actually in the charter in the first place is trying to acknowledge that the users, let's say in the village and the village system, has one rate and the town has a different rate, and a misperception that in merger, suddenly someone else would be paying a higher rate to equalize the water rate that people are paying or their sewer rate. So this was in there to tell people that in merger, your current rates and your current system costs remain to the user. I understand Annie's concern, and I don't know exactly how to write it in there that it, someday in the future they could be equal, because they're starting from very different starting points and different costs to operate both now and into the future. But if you give us some time to maybe come up with some good language to say that this does not preclude that in the future rates could not be similar or something other word across both systems, that could possibly work. Andy, your thoughts is something like that?
Yeah, I'd be much happier with that. Yeah.
We're,
I raised this question quite a long time ago, and
Okay.
the response was, we'll come up with language that makes it
Okay.
unambiguous that they can be the same. But
So Greg, if you might, let me try this again. This does not preclude that sometime in the future, both systems' rates could be near identical. Near identical. How's that? I can't say they'll be exact to the penny, but they'll be near identical, because both of them have debt, and I don't know how that will all play out in rate. So if that's acceptable, that's my best guess at the moment.
I have concern with being near identical, but
What
why
would
not?
you like?
Why can't they be? Could have the same rates.
Okay, well, all right, they could, sure. Okay, could have the same rates.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pat, Vincent, Dawn, do you accept that change? Are you okay with that?
I don't have any problems with it.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary, but I also don't think it's worth holding up the rest of the meeting for it.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you for your feedback. Okay, section 301B on page 9. And yeah, Greg, if you could straddle the split in the page, there we go. So that section, at a previous meeting, we agreed that we would use the language from the letter that our board sent to the House Government Ops Committee. And so the strikeout language is what was there in Part B, and the underlined language is taken directly from that letter, and that's what we agreed to. Andy?
Yeah, I raised a concern about this, and the only thing was the strikeout through the letter B. I wasn't complaining about the words that were struck out. It's just that that was my own, and I think when my comment in the email I sent earlier was misinterpreted, that I was objecting to the struck out language. It's
Okay.
just the index there. That
When the
letter.
document is, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I know. I'm just explaining that I wasn't objecting to the struck out language. I was just pointing out a typo.
Okay.
And yeah, it's no big deal.
When the document is finalized, that B will pop back up when the track changes is turned off. Okay. Any other questions on that section, board members? Okay. Page 11, section 307B. This is something that Andy and I have gone back and forth on quite a bit. And I think the question is the sentence that's added at the end of section 307B in the yellow highlighting, whether we want to keep that in or not. It is not in an existing charter. It is something that was suggested at some point in time during the process of crafting this charter. It is up to the board whether to keep it in. Andy?
I believe our employees need to have a consistent process for hiring, firing, assessment, promotion, etc., that is separate from the whims of elected officials. I don't think that we should be weighing in on the fate of employees. So I strongly object to that sentence being in the charter.
John, Vince, or Pat? Vince?
So I have a question. Say we were to hire a police chief. Let's say Ron retires and we hire a new police chief. Do we have the power to remove the chief? We do not. So, you know, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'm just saying, like, let's say our next chief is someone who is not of great repute. You know, you need a mechanism in the town charter, in my opinion, to be able to counteract a rogue chief or somebody who brings in bad culture to the department. I don't know about individual officers, but I know that definitely from the chief perspective, we should have the ability to remove a leader who does not do his job effectively or her job effectively. I just think, you know, we're the board of the people, and being at the mercy of waiting for someone to retire or move on is not really, you know, what I want to get into as a municipality.
So, Vince, two things. The first is the manager is responsible for hiring and firing. The only person that the board is responsible for is the manager. So, okay. No, the board would not be able to say, we're going to fire the police chief. That is the manager's job. However, open meeting law does allow boards to enter executive session to discuss the performance, hiring, and firing of personnel. So open meeting law does cover what this particular sentence is trying to accomplish. So if it did not exist in the charter, it would not eliminate our ability to have conversations with the manager about personnel issues. And as you know, we've had a couple of these in the last months since you've joined our board. And that's usually what happens. The manager comes and says, here's the situation. Here's what we're going to be doing about it. This is what our attorney says. Just wanted you to know. And that's really what this sentence is trying to accomplish. Whether it's there or not, we still have the power to talk to the manager about employees.
All right. Then to me, it doesn't really matter.
Okay. Andy had his hand up, and then Pat.
So my recollection about any discussions we've had with the manager is only when it entails either a legal or liability question. I have not ever been in a discussion with the manager about how a employee interacts with the public, how the employee completes their documentation on time, any of those kind of discussions we do not have. I've never experienced that in my 7 years on the select board.
Neither have I, Andy.
So I think, Elaine, you just said that we've had these in last couple of months. I don't believe
We've
that's
had
true.
We've had executive sessions with the manager in the last couple months, during which he has presented us with specific information regarding performance or pending litigation that has to do with personnel. I'm not talking about criticizing somebody for the front porch forum post that they made or making comments about the way they do their job. That's Evan's responsibility. It is not our responsibility whatsoever. And that's not what I'm getting at.
That's exactly why I think this sentence should come out.
Then let's do it. Pat or Vince? Okay.
I'm okay.
We will strike the sentence in yellow. I just want to get across the importance of understanding that the ability of a board to speak to the manager about serious personnel issues is very important and is protected by state law. We are not going to lose that power, that ability, if we remove this sentence.
Yeah. As long as that's the case, then
Yeah.
I'm fine with that not being in there.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
And to be clear, I agree with that. And my intent here is to take it out of the charter, not to impinge on our ability to have any discussions with the manager.
Yes. Okay, the next item that was a little confusing because there's so much markup in the document here is subchapter 6, page 14, the section on ordinances. I'm going to take a quick second to just review what's in there and what's not in there because it's super confusing with the italics and the strike through. So section 601 says ordinances will be adopted in accordance with state law pursuant to 24 VSA 1972. We should probably say 1972 to 1976. And I say that because what state statute is referring to is the warning, adoption, petition to disapprove, and penalties regarding ordinances. What's not in the state statute are public hearings, effective upon passage, rescission of existing ordinances, and the petition for new ordinances. Those four powers are enumerated in this subchapter as section 602, 3, 4, and 5. Actually, there's two 604s. We need to change the second one to 5. So the things that the trustees have in their charter from the statute are there. Ours has those additional 4 abilities that come from the original town charter, the current town charter. And so we've added back in the ability to have hearings, and we've retained the ability to be effective on passage, to rescind existing ordinances, and to allow residents to petition for new ordinances. So if that's what we understood, I know it's really not clear from the way it's marked up in the document. I see Dawn nodding her head. Is Andy or Pat or Vince, does that make sense?
Yep.
So no, sorry, I'm still confused. So what did we add in the? I thought there was a sentence that was going to be added back in about having a at least one public hearing.
Yeah, that's at the bottom of section 6. Oh,
I think it's up.
I'm
Yeah, right there. The select board shall hold a minimum of one public hearing prior to the adoption of any ordinance.
yeah. It's one line at the very end of a lot of cross stuff.
Yep.
So that puts us at a requirement of a minimum of one public hearing. And then the select board can always decide, like, this is a really important issue. We need to have more than one hearing.
So relative to our prior process, what are we removing? The need to, I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't paying attention. I'm terrible right now.
I'm looking at our.
So we've removed the first and second readings?
So yes, because that's covered in the state statute.
You see Greg's hand just went up. Got any clarification, Greg?
Please go ahead, Greg.
Sure. So the state version, the 24 VSA 1972 and other sections, does not specify a public hearing. It says the legislative body needs to adopt the ordinance. Then it takes effect 60 days later if there's no petition. I don't need to repeat everything Elaine said. The select board talked about adding in a public hearing process as part of that, in addition to the state statute. That's the 602A. The select board shall hold a minimum of one public hearing prior to adoption. But apart from that, it kind of, to me at least, when I read it, it comes down to a question for the select board of, do you want to stick with the state process slightly modified, or more or less what the town has right now for its ordinance adoption process in its current charter?
I think what we have here is a hybrid. It adopts the state process, and then it adds to it the things that we don't want to lose from the current charter.
So if the board's okay with that, I could add something, state law pursuant to 1972. I'll get the 1976.
Yep.
76. Additional requirements noted in this subchapter, something like that.
Sure. And Greg, there's two 604s in there. We want to get.
I told you I was going to get Sarah to look at it and didn't quite get around to it.
It's okay. Does that process address the concerns, and do you feel that it is true to the current charter in terms of what we're currently doing, but streamlines it the littlest bit to make it a little smoother?
I'm okay with this because I like how, again, it brings us closer to state law, which is my preference. But the addition of the public hearing is something that Essex in general, I think, feels strongly about. So we do have a public hearing, and then the public also has the 60 days before the ordinance is adopted according to the state law. So there's plenty of time between the public hearing and the official adoption before the ordinance goes into effect, as far as I read it. Because VSA, is that correct, or am I?
Well, so Pat, what we're doing, we discussed at our last meeting that we didn't like the 60 days. We are able to make it effective upon passage. So we're keeping that piece. Is that all right with you?
Okay, yeah, I misunderstood then, but
we're still keeping the ability in state statute for voters to disapprove the law.
okay, yeah, that's okay.
And to be clear, it's 44 days for the petition.
Right.
Not 60. Yeah, it's 44.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like we're good with subchapter 6 at this point. Next item is 702A on page 16. We added a phrase, including the treasurer. And because appointing the treasurer is a power of the manager, that's why it's in this section. It could be clearer by saying separating out the treasurer from the employees, that the manager can appoint because the treasurer is not technically an employee. So we could make that appointment a separate line, like 702B. If folks feel that's clear enough, we can keep it. Andy.
We also lost the appointment of the town clerk, which is a big deal because then you'd have to elect the town clerk if the town clerk's not appointed.
So
I think we need to. I think this section is short at least one. I don't know, and I don't know if assistant town manager is also an elected position if it's not explicitly appointed. I don't know.
So the town clerk is a department head. So I'm assuming.
Yeah, but in some towns they're elected.
Yeah, but in our town she's appointed, or she's a department head, and we're talking about our town.
Yeah, but my concern is that if you don't explicitly state, because our current charter explicitly says that the manager appoints the town clerk. My concern is that if you don't explicitly appoint your town clerk, do you then have to go with state statute and then elect your town clerk? In which case we would have, yes, an employee, but they would be an elected employee, not an appointed one. That's my concern. That's why I'm asking the question.
I think it's implicit that as an employee, they're an employee and they're elected if we put in the charter that they should be elected, otherwise they're an employee.
You can't just hire somebody and call them the town clerk unless you have the right to appoint that person. Otherwise, you have to elect them. Is my understanding of statute. So, or somebody's got to look at it and clarify that, because I don't want to accidentally go to a situation where we have to elect our town clerk. Because I think that's the default in statute.
Evan, can you help us here?
I'm not familiar with the statute. Greg, you want to take a stab, because we talked about this earlier.
I made a note. Hopefully the board can see it. Probably a question for Dan Richardson. Do we need to call out the treasurer in a separate section, and do we also need to, in that same section, specify that the town clerk is appointed versus elected? I think best bet is to seek legal counsel on the question.
Okay.
And I'm sorry for asking so many questions, but in our current charter, there's a long list of specific appointed positions that the manager appoints. And I just want to make sure that we're not accidentally losing a power that we need. And I think we ought to look at all of those lists. Director of Public Works, that makes sense. I know that's just an employee, that's a position that you would hire somebody to do, but I don't know, of these other ones that are listed here, has anybody looked to make sure that we're not inadvertently putting ourselves in a bad position by not explicitly listing them? That's all I'm asking.
I recall you asking this before. And
yeah, but it was never answered, so I'm asking it again. And just because a question isn't answered doesn't mean it's not a valid question.
That was not what I was going to say. What I was going to say is, I know that you have asked this before, and I'm pretty sure staff has looked into it. And though I don't have the specific memory of the answer, the fact that I don't have a specific memory makes me think that what's in here is fine. However, to satisfy your understanding of it, we can certainly ask Dan. Dawn, you have your hand up.
Years ago, the treasurer and the town clerk were elected positions. At some point in the last, 10 to 15 years, that changed and they became an appointed position. So in order for that to happen, there had to have been a change somewhere in the charter.
I don't know. Well, we'd have to go back into different charters to see when that happened. But at this point, in looking back at the town charter, as Andy says, there's a very long list of positions that the manager appoints with approval of the select board. If in order to feel secure that we do not get somehow accidentally into the territory of having to elect our clerk, we could certainly add a sentence that says that the town manager will appoint a town clerk. It's not a big sentence. We can add it quickly in. How does the select board feel about that?
Okay with that.
So Greg, let's plan on at adding that sentence in unless Dan advises otherwise. Is that okay? All right. The next section is section 801 on page 19. 801. Oh, 801 and section 801. We simply rewrote that to say that we're going to go by statute in terms of how the Board of Civil Authority is composed, and that was what we discussed last time. So it's just a confirmation of that. And is that okay with board members? Okay. And 803, same page, we are removing the term length of the planning commissioners because term length can vary. We just need to worry about the appointments in the charter. And I believe at some point, Andy also pointed out that there are term lengths in the DRB in section 804, terms of 3 years, which we could remove that as well to be consistent. Okay. And Greg, I believe the term limits for the DRB are also mentioned in section 109C. So we might want to pull that out as well. The only other edit that I'm aware of that we really have to make is going back a little, page 10, section 303A. It refers to a 7-member board, and we need to change that to a 6-member board.
I'm sorry, Elaine, I was going up to 109C. Can you repeat that?
Of course, I was going too fast, sorry. Section 303A. Andy pointed out that section A has, yeah, okay, that's fixed, okay. Andy?
So when we had our last meeting with the meeting with the trustees where we discussed their version of it, you asked us to only talk about their specific questions that they had. And now you've gone through and reviewed only those sections. And so are we saying that there's no other changes allowed, or what's the,
so
I mean, I'm feeling like any comment I make is not appreciated on any of this. So if you don't want my comments, I can withhold them.
it is certainly not my intention to make you feel like your comments are not appreciated. And I think that you are understanding the pressure that I am under and our board is under to get this right and to meet deadlines that we've agreed to meet. So there's some tension around this, and I'm trying to do my job as chair to move our board along in an efficient way. So I apologize if there's tension, but I'm going to push, and you can continue to push as you always have been. Your comments are welcome. What I'm going to say, though, is if we could be judicious about the comments, in that we cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Every town in Vermont has charter changes almost on an annual basis to tweak the things that aren't working, to correct errors, and to make improvements. We are not signing off on the stone engraved version of the charter. It is a living, breathing document that can change over time. And while ideally we can make it as perfect as we possibly can before we go to the voters, we're gonna miss something. And some things are not essential and others are. I feel like we have covered tonight all of the essential things. And we have told our residents that at the end of October, we are going to stop discussing the charter and we're going to take it to them for them to read. And we want to be able to give them as best effort as we can without any additional changes. So that's where I'm at. And I'm happy to hear your changes. If they're substantial, we must make them. If they're not, we don't have to, because we can always amend based on experience later on. That's important for us to understand that. I'm afraid I didn't see which order those hands came up. I see Andy and Dawn.
I'll let Dawn talk. Go ahead.
I just want to point out that in regards to Andy's email, I appreciated it, but 104B and 104C are the elephant in the room for me, and I think we really need to discuss these before we go any further.
Hang on, I'm getting there, Dawn.
Okay. In regards to those separate districts.
104A and B?
B and C.
B and C. Okay. What do you want to discuss about these?
Well, I said all along I don't agree with them, but I know that Andy had some concerns with them also. I don't think there should be, if you're going to merge, Elaine, there shouldn't be separate districts until a future board decides that it should not be part of your charter.
We needed to establish these districts because in the new community, the former village would be continuing to pay a different tax rate. And so we need to create that district in order for them to continue to pay a different tax rate. That's my understanding of that. And item C was something, a district offered by the trustees to offset the cost of merger on the town outside the village by keeping the cost of their significant sidewalk maintenance with just the villagers for that transition period. If we don't have that, the dollar amount on an annual basis that town outside the village residents will pay will be higher. And so in a sense, that section C is a concession from the village that we'll hold on to those expenses until 12 years to make it more palatable and more affordable. So that's my understanding of how those two came about. I realize that they're not ideal, but this is something that I don't think we can change, but I want to talk to you about it. I want to hear more about your concerns.
So what you're saying, especially as far as the plowing and the sidewalks, and we have heard from so many people saying, I live here and my sidewalks don't get plowed, and I live there and my kid walks to school and the sidewalks are plowed. Why can't everybody get the same service without having to pay being a special tax district, first of all? Because when we merge, this is my whole thing about merger. When you merge, you are now the town of Essex. You're no longer the village with special privileges to get extra, care for your sidewalks. You're part of the town of Essex, and every voter in Essex deserves the same service.
That's true. I need to push back a little to say that it's not special services that they're getting. The village just plows their sidewalks differently than we do. We have way more, and we have we have more mileage of sidewalks, and we plow them differently. The plow plan that we use, that Dennis presents us every year, can change. And based on the cost of that plowing plan, we can adjust out in the town. But the village has, up until now, been controlling their own plowing. They are not trying to maintain special services or special favors of any kind. They are trying to withhold the cost of that service so that the town outside the village doesn't have to start paying for it. They are a more dense community. They have more sidewalks, And until last year or 2 years ago, none of their children took buses. They had to plow all the sidewalks. And so now that busing has been introduced, there's more service equity on that front because that's out in the town too. But now the town plowing plan should probably change, and costs will increase if that happens. And that's a decision for the select board to make. But this sidewalk district is not an attempt to hold on to something special. It's an attempt to offset the cost of the increase. It's important to the overall cost over the 12 years. I don't know if that's convincing or not, but that's what it is.
It's not convincing because you're still calling it the village.
It's the district with the boundaries within. So, okay, I can call it the former village. I can call it the unincorporated village. It's still, the fact remains that until 2 years ago, those children didn't take buses. And so going forward, we could adjust the plowing plan and everyone can have that conversation together and move forward on it. But at the moment, we're trying to offset costs with that district. That's the purpose of that district, is to offset costs.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. There's more hands up. Okay,
Andy and then Pat.
Yeah, I guess to just comment a little bit on the sidewalk thing. The cost of the village plowing now is in the town budget, right? It would move out of the town budget for this. My only, and I agree that yes, any future select board could decide to either make this permanent or could decide to expand it or could decide to do whatever they want. But I know there are folks that are outside the village that would be very interested in having this as some sort of, have it be clearer that that's the case somewhere in the charter. You know, some of these things I'm looking at are to, you know, try to encourage people to vote for the charter. But if we don't think we need it, we don't think we need it. Anyway, back on 104B, my concern here is that we don't specify how the transitional period will occur. It just says it's a length of 12 years. My big concern here is that people could view this as setting us up for a large bait and switch, because the 12 years could be done in any way a future select board chooses to. It could be done as a negotiation between different select board members saying, hey, I want this and I want this, or I want that. If you give me this, we can have a smaller tax increase in the village or in the town, change in the town, or it becomes a completely, and I agree that it probably is anyway, a discussion that way, but this to me looks like setting ourselves up for the possibility of a big bait and switch. And I think people will be concerned, voters will be concerned that how we are doing that transitional period is not explicitly stated here. And I understand it's complicated by the fact that grand list changes, that there's all kinds of factors that are gonna influence the actual numbers, but we don't say in here that it's as close to a 12-year, equal change every year. Not equal only from the percentage of a percentage, not equal from a number standpoint. I understand that. But I look at this and I realize that there's no definition of how the tax rate's going to transition.
My understanding, and Pat, I just want to say one thing and then I'll hand it over to you. My understanding when we started having conversations with the public just before COVID hit was that the table of data that Sarah had prepared for us, we had a bar chart that showed the 12-year increment, and that visual was going to be a part of the charter, in that it would be considered the model that the select board would follow, and that it's the model that the select board must follow, and that anything that happens, that 12-year window, that's what it is, and it cannot change. I realize it doesn't specifically lay that out, but the visual was the part that was supposed to go along with it to indicate this is year 1, year 2, year 3, and these are the percentages. So that's my understanding, and I'd like Evan to weigh in on that after Pat's had a chance to talk. Go ahead, Pat.
So I think in response to the sidewalk thing, Elaine, I agree with you in that it was set up to be a cost-saving technique to avoid a even larger tax increase year to year for TOV. But I think that you would be hard pressed to find a town in Vermont that does not focus on the larger population and sidewalk plowing primarily first. That happens in St. Johnsbury, in Linden, in all the towns where I grew up. They will plow primarily the larger population centers first. And I think that those instances where we know that the TOV needs plowing, it's something that we've already talked to Evan about as part of something we want to see in the upcoming budget year. So I don't see that as a large problem. Rather, I see it as something that the village is continuing to pay for an extended period of time without needing to foist it off onto the entirety of the town, because the village, with being the large population center of a combined Essex community, would still continue to need and see large chunk of the primary plowing. It's up to us as a select board to say, in the upcoming years, we want to see that expanded out, and I think that we're already doing that.
Yeah.
As far as the other one, I can certainly see where you're coming from, Andy, in that it's not explicitly stated here, but I feel like that's really getting very deep into the weeds, because I think that that's really functional. Could a future select board change that? Yes, I suppose so. But that's not really how the mechanism was built. It's also possible that in 10 years, nobody but me decides to show up at the polls, and I vote for myself to be the select board, and then I vote for my neighbor to be another select person. And it's just, we're talking about really out there scenarios. I don't see that happening, and I don't see that we're going to cover every single possible situation that could ever possibly come up. What we have talked about and what has been clear is that it was always presented to be a normalized, equalized year-to-year change. So the idea that in 8 years a select board will all of a sudden completely wipe that out is very foreign to me. And if they attempted to do so, I suspect that they would probably see the consequences in votes that would get them out of office.
Right. Evan, can you weigh in here?
Sure. First, Andy, can I ask you a question? Not meant to put you on the spot, but and this is going to help my response. What is your concern about that it doesn't say contiguous 12 years, or is it that the select board can change the rate in any given year? So that will help me answer the question. Or
my
something
my concern is this people don't trust us, right?
Okay.
That's
good.
The way I read this, it says that the rate of change is negotiable.
Okay. I'm writing myself a note. Okay.
I just don't see that.
So the amount of money to be integrated probably by the time the state, if it passes the electorate and goes down to the state, is probably going to be close to $4 million, 3.7 to $4 million. The 12 years was sort of shown as if you took it in stages, it would pare itself down almost like a bond payment. So if it helped, for B could read something like, for a transitional period of 12 consecutive years, commencing, et cetera, and if you wanted to be in the charter language, to be as close to evenly spread during those 12 years. You can't, every year can't be exact, but the goal is that after the 12th payment, you are equalized. And I could share with you a concern that a board might say, yeah, I know we're supposed to charge the residents of the town outside the village, let's just call it, as a guess, 2%. But our budget's going up 3%. Why don't we just make it less this year and we'll pick it up next year? That's bad policy. So if you want to maybe insert some language that kind of keeps people honest years in the future, and would require a charter change to change. I can tell you, in talking with elected officials at the state, their comment is, after a brokered deal, we would be hard pressed to accept a charter change that changed the terms of the deal. After all you've been through, after all these years. So I could suggest that maybe a word for a transitional period of 12 consecutive years, commencing on July 1st, and each year the rate of pay shall be consistent, or as consistent as possible, for those 12 years. Would that satisfy your concerns?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
And
Dawn?
that's the best I could do on the fly.
Dawn, does that help your concerns with section B? It does, okay.
Now, I'd like to go back a little bit to the sidewalk. Everybody has their view of the sidewalk system. The issue, as I see it in the town, is the town is 31 square miles outside of the village's 5 square miles. Okay, the village has an integrated, basically grid-like system for plowing. The town does not. The town has a lot more area to cover. It has more sidewalk and path than the village, believe it or not. The town is not even contiguous to itself in routing. So for instance, the Public Works Department has to go out miles to get to Susie Wilson and Route 15 and to the fort. The village is closer to that area than it would be. So there's a lot of reasons why giving the same level of service that the village is used to into the town is problematic. Is it something that can be overcome? Yes, but certainly not immediately, and certainly without a lot more planning and cost, because of the number of the pieces of equipment needed and the number of people in order to do it. So I just want people to understand that it's not that either staff or no, doesn't want to do it. It is a large task and it has not been defined as to what level of service that means. So, thank you.
Thanks, Evan. So, Dawn, I don't want to leave this item if you still feel it's an elephant in the room.
I'm not going to push it. The other part is by leaving the village as a separate tax district, you have not dissolved the village, is my other problem with this.
I'm sorry, dissolved?
Well, what I'm saying is merged. When you merge, you're all going to become the town of Essex, and you're still letting the entity that's merging with the town of Essex be known as the village for the next 12 years.
Well, yeah, in a temporary way. In a temporary way until those districts are done, and then it goes away.
It would be known as the unincorporated village.
Right. And for example, the town of Hartford has 5 unincorporated villages. So
I know.
After the 12 years, that distinction, those districts will go away. So, I mean, I'm assuming it's a legal apparatus that's necessary in order for us to accomplish this change in taxation.
I understand that. I'm not going to argue. I'm good. Just let it go. Move on.
Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Dawn. I appreciate it. And Andy, I appreciate your comments. And I'm very grateful to Evan for helping us thread that needle.
Sure. Andy, and Madam Chair, I don't know, Andy, is that your only one, or are there others?
105A, I have questions about.
105A.
Where it talks about, says in the event of a resignation, the remaining members of the board where the resignation occurred will appoint from the registered voters from the communities over which they have jurisdiction. Somewhere in the middle there. Yeah, you got read that sentence there. Yeah. It's not clear to me who a former select board member has jurisdiction over.
I think it's that the remaining members of the board, the interim governing body, make the appointment.
From what jurisdiction? It says over which they have jurisdiction. From the registered voters of the communities over which they have jurisdiction. So the select board members were elected by the town, so they can appoint from either the village, the former village, or the former town outside the village, or only town outside the village. That's where it's, it doesn't say from their ward because they're not really in wards yet. So I'm confused as to who can be appointed.
I wonder if a simple change in the phrase over which they have jurisdiction, it could say over which they had jurisdiction, with the understanding being that the person who's being replaced is going to come from the place where they had jurisdiction. Would that be clearer?
Yes, because it's unclear as to.
Okay.
Right. I guess that's. And then, yeah, I guess, yeah, I'll let 50 or 105C go. That's less concerned about that one. Section 114 has me totally confused. This was a late add by the trustees, I believe. This makes no sense at all to me. So we will have a select board election in March of 2021 for the person who's or for the seat that expires. And Elaine, that's your seat, coincidentally. And this says that seat, regardless of whether you're reelected or not, gets extended until June 30th of 2022. So it nullifies the election should you lose your seat in March of 2021. Optically, that looks really bad. So I don't understand why we're extending. And then, yeah, I don't understand this at all.
If I recall from the memo that we received on September 4th that contained answers from Dan Richardson to all of our questions at that time, I thought that this section was largely dependent upon what the legislature decides in terms of timing. Evan and Greg, I'm not sure. This is a confusing section.
Yeah.
And if the let's say the merger is approved at March town meeting and then it's approved by the legislature in May, then those seats should expire in June 2021, not 2022. So unless
well, why would they be extended at all? Because we've just had an election. Why would they?
Because the new charter wouldn't be in effect. It wouldn't be the new town yet.
But it won't be the new town until 2022 because you've got a year-long transition period.
I would say this, I'll agree. I think this one particular section definitely needs some more study as to language. It really depends on when the state approves the charter, if they approve the charter. And there is a concern that you have this vote in March and something may go into effect in July that starts to move out term, either eliminates the terms or requires a separate special election. And that's one of the things we were trying to avoid was special elections. So I can agree with Andy that this is somewhat confusing and should be discussed with Dan Richardson specifically.
And I wonder if it's as simple as saying that at the start of the fiscal year, during which the charter is approved by the legislature, all existing officials' terms would extend until the end of that fiscal year. And that puts everybody in the interim governing body. And then there's an election for the new board.
Then you're putting a term of the charter that has to take effect before it's approved by the legislature.
No, what I'm saying
yes, because you have a vote. You have a vote in March. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
What I'm saying is if there's a vote in March, then those people are elected and they're in office. And then assuming that the charter is approved and the legislature approves it as well, then that following June 30, everybody who's in office on June 30th, they're in office for one more year as part of the interim governing body. So whoever is going to be up for election the following year would just stay in their seat until the end of the interim governing year, the transition year. And then there's an election to elect the permanent board. Does that make sense?
It's tricky to word, but
yeah. And so what you're saying is the following, after charter becomes effective July 1st, assuming the state agrees with that.
Yeah.
The following June 30th would start the term of the next board.
The interim governing board,
the
yes.
Interim governing board.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with this because I don't think that's the intent. The idea, let's take a couple steps back. The original idea was it will be hard enough for the existing trustees who have been working on merger for the last several years and who have knowledge of the ordinances and policies and procedures and contracts to then be out, it may be en masse, have elections and bring people in who may or may not have any, would have to get up to speed. Let's just be polite. Would have to get up to speed in a time period that is devoid of time. Time is of the essence, right? Because you have a very short, potentially a very short transitional period to the next fiscal year, depending upon when the state approves it. So the idea was that the elected officials, as many as possible, would remain as that transitional government. The trick is how to word that so as not to just hand someone an extra term unnecessarily. Greg, do you have anything else to add to that?
I'm wondering if this is referring to a scenario where the legislature does not approve the charter in the year the voters approve the merger plan. So let's say this happened, the vote happens in March, this coming March. Whichever board members are on the ballot for March are going to be put on the ballot, because we won't know if the charter gets approved or not, or if the merger plan gets approved or not. So the board members will be running for the current select board seat. And if the legislature then approves the charter, but they don't get to it until next November, or a time when next fiscal year, they'd have to approve it between March and June 30th of the coming year for it to take effect in 2021. So if they approved it the following year, so it takes effect in June of 2022, whoever's up for re-election in 2022 that term would be extended until the new board takes effect 3 months later. We can talk about wording, but that's how I'm interpreting this.
And that would have someone who runs for election in March and their term end June 30th, if it's not dealt with. If that were to occur in that timeline. That's kind of what we had talked about, and that's where it gets confusing.
Which is, I'm assuming, why the idea to extend those terms was suggested in the first place, because why have someone go through an election and then only serve for 6 months?
Or 3 months.
Andy?
So we got to be careful, because I think the rest of the charter provisions are set up assuming that the interim governing board governs for an entire fiscal year. And so, right, the wording needs to be flexible enough to allow either a 2021 or a 2022 approval by the legislature, and then a full fiscal year of the interim governing body before the new town comes into play. So it's not just this paragraph. It needs to be consistent with the rest of how the charter was written.
Well, I think the initial intent was to have Dan Richardson take care of that, and so we can still defer to him for that.
Yeah, and this is why I wanted, one of the reasons I wanted to do a detailed timeline review. But I'm sorry, but I still haven't completed that. But this is one of the sticking points around that I.
So this will certainly be at the top of our list of a discussion with Dan as to how to word this.
One other reason that this was put in there is I know George was adamant that you couldn't have a board, a brand new board take over a budget that was approved by a different board. So I think he was trying to align the start of the new board with the start of a fiscal year so that it's a clean division between an interim budget and a merged budget. And I guess that's a point that could be argued as well. We have a new select board takeover, but it's at most two new select board members, so it's not a whole new board. But I guess that could be a point of discussion too. Is it really necessary to wait until the start of a fiscal year to have the new town select board take ownership.
And then, not that I am in favor of having the state's government ops committee rewrite our charter for us. I think that also they will weigh in places at their own leisure. But I agree, and I think we can certainly look at this further. I don't know if we're going to correct it here tonight.
Right.
No, it's doubtful.
Again, if anybody thought merger was simple, it's not.
Okay, board members, do you have any other comments before we move on to the next business item? All right, I don't see Vince or Pat, so just shout out if you want to say anything.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. All right, so notwithstanding that we just added a few things, the goal at this point is for us to finish working on the charter by the end of October, which is something we discussed last meeting, and so I'm hoping we can still stick to that. Our next meeting is October 19th. So ideally, we would have all of these edits settled and finished by then. I believe the 20th is our scheduled meeting with the planning commissions. And so it's possible that some edits might come out of that, but hopefully not. So ideally, the 19th meeting, we will be able to make a decision to put the charter forth for some hearings for the public to read it and then come talk to us about their thoughts. Ideally to do that throughout the month of November, or at least up until Thanksgiving. And then we have 2 regular meetings in November. We could make those, put hearings during those agendas. We could also, if we have time, add another meeting special for a public hearing on the charter. And then December 7th is the first regular meeting of December for us. So I'm hopeful we can have a vote at that time to put this charter on the ballot in March. So that's the hoped for timeline, so that everybody's aware in advance what we're thinking about. Okay. Item 5C is.
See Don's hands up.
Oh, I didn't. Thank you, Dawn.
No, I just, we open this to the public because I have little yellow hands flashing all over the screen.
Thank you for reminding me that these conversations are difficult and I don't always see the hands. So yes, let's have public input. Again, please raise your hand or put in the comment that you wish to speak. So the first hand I'm seeing is, we're going to go in this order. We're going to go Betsy, Lorraine, Brad, Irene, Annie.
Thank you, Elaine. So I am in agreement with Dawn about section 104. I think that but the tax district, for what their bonds are and what they have to pay off in debt, I think that's understandable. But if we're going to merge and we're going to be one town and you have one board that's making decisions about that town, there's certain things that the town outside of the village and the town inside the village have had planned that they wanted to do. But now we're one, and that board is going to make up a decision about what to do first based on the priorities that are facing them in the town. And so Section E of 104 is about a town improvement district so they can get their little things done that they want to do. Well, that's fine and dandy, but maybe those aren't a priority. And it's the same thing for the capital improvement district. I mean, I just don't understand why all those carve-outs. And then the bigger thing for me is in Section A of 104, for a transitional period, we don't name the 12 years here that's in every one of the others, commencing from July 1st, that they will start to pay back. And as someone else said, There is, that's 104A. There's no transitional period of 12 years. I'm concerned about that bait and switch, that they could say, well, we're done with this. We're not going to do it. The next board that comes in after the transitional year says, we don't like that. We're going to change that now. There's nothing here that seems to stay concrete when we do this. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Lorraine?
Thank you, Elaine. Just to clarify, because it looks to me like you caught that it still said 7-member board in this charter, and
Yep.
that will be changed to 6.
Yes.
And so I know you had graciously had a back and forth with me on the Facebook thread that around the statute, and the board, a select board having to be, your understanding was that it had to be 3 or 5.
Yes.
Since you said today that it would be changed to 6, is that because you guys double checked with Dan to see if this was something that had any issue with that state statute?
No, it's because that was the result of the vote. And so it is up to the legislature to determine whether we're allowed to do that. But we're following what the vote was.
Okay, so the other part that just to kind of confirm that it wouldn't be an issue is because, if I'm understanding this correctly, that first transitional board is an even numbered board of 10, which is in neither 3 or 5. And that's written into this the transitional aspect of the charter. So I would assume, since you both, the trustees and the board members, have agreed to that, that's okay then.
That's what we have in the charter.
Okay, but do you take an issue with that being an issue with the statute too, Elaine, then?
I don't think it's wise to have an even numbered board, but we're following what has been chosen by the voters.
No. I'm talking about the transitional period. That's
Right.
not chosen by the voters. That the transitional period was chartered language put in there by you and the board, select board, and the trustees, correct?
The intention behind the interim governing board is for both boards to come together, and they still will need to make the members of each former board will still need to make decisions about their former jurisdiction, because the budgets for those jurisdictions would still be in effect. So they will be making independent decisions as well as group decisions. And I understand that it becomes an even numbered board of 10, and that is what we have in there. And that's the way we were advised to do it. And that's how we're going forward.
And advised by, who was that?
We had our attorney, Dan Richardson, review the entire charter, and this passed muster with him.
Okay, so then I would assume then a 3+3 passed muster as well. And hopefully that was checked with Dan as too, since the 10-member board was checked. Because I don't understand putting something in a charter that's questionable and not checked with our town attorney. We're going to vote on.
We absolutely did check with our attorney, and the difference is, Lorraine, that the interim governing board is a temporary, less than either 12-month or less than 12-month situation.
No, Elaine, the 3+3 I'm talking about.
I realize
that's going to be in the charter. Did Dan review that as well?
Lorraine, I'd like to finish my sentence if I may.
Yeah.
So the interim governing board is a temporary situation of 12 months or less, we're estimating. And that was something that was passed muster with our attorney. The 3+3 was something that our attorney has also reviewed and does not recommend, and neither does the House Government Operations Committee, but they have not officially ruled on it. So it's still in there because that is what the residents of Essex want.
So when you say it doesn't recommend, did Dan specifically say because it doesn't meet the statute?
Yes, he says that it's going to be a difficulty for us to get that passed because it is not a precedent in any statute.
Okay, it's not a precedent. That's different than being even numbered board. It's just confusing to me that 5+5 would pass muster with the attorney, but a 3+3 wouldn't. Even if it's transitional, it's still, according to what you had told me, does not meet the statute of having to be either 3 or 5. So clearly there are times when it's okay. Yes, by that logic.
I can understand how that would be confusing. I wish I had I wish I could be able to call to mind other charters from other merged communities that I could give you some other examples of how it's done, but I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head.
No, it's
can I
okay. It's
comment?
just the point of being at cross purposes with a statute that you had specifically cited when we were discussing it. So I just wanted to be clear that obviously Dan said that during the interim that was okay. And I don't recall him saying that you couldn't do a 3+3, but it's just that it hadn't happened and it hadn't been in existence and it's unusual and you run into tie issues. But we would potentially run into tie issues during the transitional period as well if it's a 5+5, representing a town and representing a district. So I just wanted to make a point of that. So
Yes,
I appreciate your time,
thank you.
Lynn. Thank you.
Andy, I think Andy wanted to contribute to that discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe clarify something for Lorraine, that the statute does say 3 or 5, but there are also plenty of towns that have 7. And that is authorized by their charter, because when their charter is approved, it becomes statute. So there is also statute that affirms 7-member boards for specific towns, which is what we would be doing with a 6-member board. Is, if it's approved by the legislature, it becomes statute. With regard to the transitional board that we're discussing, I've read all of the merger agreements that I could find in statute, and nearly every one of them combines the 2 boards together for some period of time. And so there's huge precedence for that happening.
Right, and that makes total sense to me, but my understanding of what I read of that statute, Andy, it looked to me like the default starting point was 3. And then of course you would add 2, so that's why you end up with 5. It didn't say it has to be, it just said that's what you have to have 3. And then you could add 2. So it's not, to me, it's not clear. So, but I appreciate, and I totally understand. It makes sense to me to have a transitional board together because there's work that's unfinished. That totally makes sense. You want the experience to come. I got that. That's not my point. So I appreciate the explanation.
Thank you. Next person is Brad Kennison.
Thank you. Just want to clarify 601 adoption of ordinances, make sure I understand the final product. So ordinances shall be adopted in accordance to the state law pursuant to 24 VSA 1972 through 1976, correct?
Yes.
And the select board shall hold a minimum of 1 public hearing prior to the adoption of any ordinance.
Yes.
Every ordinance shall become effective upon passage unless otherwise specified. And then as far as rescission of, you still have the option to petition within 44 days, as long as you obtain 5% of the voting signatures. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to go back to 105B.
Okay.
When it speaks about the transition period in the interim governing body, they'll identify conflicting ordinances and determine in each case whether the more or less restrictive ordinance will apply or a combination thereof. So how is that going to be applied? I know it says pursuant to 110, so do they still have to follow the procedures of 110?
Yeah, I would assume that if the ordinances were changed in any way, we would have to go through the hearing process and follow those rules for enacting the new version.
That's what I want to be sure of. Every time ordinances comes up, the term firearms ordinance comes up, and I want to make sure that the interim governing body does not have the authority to just arbitrarily adopt the village firearms ordinance.
No, the interim governing board does not have the power to do anything arbitrarily. Okay, Brad?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Irene and then Annie.
Thank you. A couple of things. I heard during the sidewalk discussion The town outside the village was repeatedly referred to as the town, and that's inappropriate. The town includes both parts of town. When referring to the town outside the village, please be very clear so that it's not confusing to people who aren't as familiar as some of the rest of us are and can distinguish the difference just from the context. I have a question about 106D. It talks about how within 3 years there can be redistricting if the districts aren't equal. I believe there should be a threshold placed there. They're never going to be equal to the person, equal to the penny, but if they fall within that 10% threshold that tends to be the legal measure, I think it would be appropriate to put in something like that so you don't have select boards coming to power deciding, whoops, we're in power now, we can switch around the representation. So I think it's best practice to actually put that threshold number in there or some other way of determining the threshold if possible. I heard it stated by the select board chair that nearly every town has charter changes every year, and I would beg to differ. When I tuned into the House Government Operations Committee, they were considering about a half dozen charter changes that had passed this year. So maybe this was an unusual year, but I assume this year would be like any other, at least because that was before COVID hit. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Annie?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm clear because I just want to make sure that we're all clear. Am I understanding correctly that the reason for the special tax districts is solely intended to ensure that the taxes for those who live in the town outside the village do not suddenly go up all at once, and that we created this in the document, in the language, in the charter, so that we could kindly, from the village and towards the town outside the village, equally manage the taxes? Am I correct that that is why that is there?
Yes, that is why it's there. Otherwise, we could just do it in 1 year and the town outside the village taxes could go up by hundreds of dollars in one bill. Yes, that is why we are doing that.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to ask every resident that is currently in attendance at this meeting to remember that we said this, because the words bait and switch are the integral piece of a bait and switch is a bait. And I can tell you with confidence that every member of the select board and every member of the trustees have worked earnestly and authentically. And I know all of you very well. Dawn is new to me, but still, it is really uncomfortable for me to sit as a member of this community where I trust and value so many people and have us have to work so hard to make sure we don't look like we're baiting and switching. Because the fact is we are not. And yes, absolutely, we want to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable. So it is correct and appropriate that we make sure that it doesn't look that way. I agree 100% that we need to make sure it doesn't feel or look that way, because people feeling safe is the most important thing there is. But please, board, select board, I implore you to remember that you're not actually baiting anyone. Don't forget that you're not baiting anyone. Please. Thank you all very much for your time. And oh, one more thing. Andy and Elaine and Dawn and Patrick and Vince. Did I get everybody?
Yep.
Thank you for your generosity of spirit and your passion that is making you stand so firmly where you need to discuss things. And I know how hard it is to disagree. And I so admire and appreciate and value your dedication to this task. Thank you.
Thank you. Raj Chawla.
I just wanted to speak to that, I believe it's 104A through D, the special task districts. I believe the first one is a mechanism to ensure that the village is able to pay off its remaining bond. And that mechanism is required so that the village residents are the only ones paying off that bond, which is the only population that's responsible for it. The second one is to phase in the village budget into the town budget. And that is very much an effort to mitigate the the all-at-once hit that would happen to the town outside the village residents, taxpayers, if we did this without that. The sidewalk district is just what it looks like, but folks should also remember that while the village, and this goes to kind of Betsy Dunn's comments, while the village is paying for its own sidewalk maintenance and plowing, we are also paying for any work that's done on sidewalks in the new outside, or the ward, I think we're going to call it Ward 1, so in the town outside the village. So not only are village residents now continuing to pay for sidewalk maintenance in an area outside the village, but we're also taking on the responsibility and not giving that back to the town, the new town. So this again is an effort by village residents to mitigate the cost increase and phase in the impact on town outside the village residents. And again, with D, with the capital district, once again, village residents will be responsible for continuing on for that period, funding and trying to complete some of the capital projects on our capital plan. We do things a little differently. We will also be continuing and frankly, probably paying more for capital projects that are going to be ongoing in the town outside the village during that period. So this isn't, you know, holding on to special pet projects. It's really, you know, finding as many ways and levers as we can to mitigate the impact on the town outside the village. And this, frankly, is sort of groundbreaking in terms of how past merger proposals have gone, because I don't think there has been one where there have been so many different ways and efforts and attempts made to, you know, phase in the increase for town outside the village taxpayers. And I hear what everybody's asking about. It is a little confusing, but I hope that helps to clarify a little bit the motivations and the reality that, you know, this really extends out the core problem village residents and taxpayers have and why they're asking for merger for another 12 years. You know, we're going to be paying for two sets of things instead of spreading our what we would assume our sidewalk maintenance that would normally have just spread out to the town. And Dawn's right, that would have required a whole new conversation about how we approach that. So I didn't mean to speak for so long, but I just wanted to make sure people are clear about what the actual intent is and the actual impact is. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Irene.
Hi, just quickly, I'm wondering if the public hearings that you plan to hold in the next several months are purely for you to sell your merger charter, or will you be accepting changes from the public? Thanks.
The point of our hearings in November will be to take feedback from the public and to help understand the ways that we need to communicate to make sure that folks understand what's in there, because it's very complicated. If we learn from the public that there is a significant issue that absolutely must be changed, that impacts the entirety of the town and not just a small pocket of people, we will consider making an edit to the charter, but it will be 100%, 99% done by the time it comes out to the public. We may make some edits, we may make some tweaks based on what we hear, but I do not anticipate that we're going to be doing significant rewriting that's based upon the public feedback. We have worked 2.5 to 3 years on this charter and this process, and we feel confident that we have thoroughly vetted it. And while there are definitely questions and issues that we continue to have, I want to remind everybody that a charter is a living, breathing document. It does not have to be 100% perfect, but we're going to try to get it as close as we can. And then we can always go through the charter revision process like every other town can on an annual basis. Annie.
Hi, I just want to remind the board that I know, and you know that you are working from an earnest place to do what is best for our community. And I am not comfortable with somebody suggesting that you are selling merger. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, looks like all the hands are down. So let's move on.
Except Andy's.
Oh, I see
Sorry.
you now. I don't see your
Yep.
hand.
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
don't I
yeah.
see that?
I
There,
don't know.
there you are. Sorry, Andy, please go
yeah,
ahead.
no problem. I'm sorry I got a little heated earlier. I don't intend to do another in-depth review other than to look at the timeline. I just want to make sure there's no other gotchas like that 114 one. So I just want to put that out there ahead of time. That's my intent. Is that's at this point the only thing I'm going to want to look at in earnest. And I'm hoping I don't find anything, but as soon as I do, if I do, I'll try to give you early warning.
I appreciate that. I'm sure Evan and Greg will also, they'll be talking to Dan and they will try to figure out that 114 and we'll have a pretty decent solution from Dan, I'm sure. Okay, and now I think there's no more hands. Section business item 5C is executive session, which we'll put towards the end of the meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, we amended the agenda to move the minutes that were from September 21st out of the consent agenda into business item 5D. So Andy, would you like to bring up the minute change you wanted to make?
Yeah, it's small, but I think it's important. In line 110, there are two references to Planning Commission term limits, which should read term lengths, not limits. Those are two very different things. We're not limiting anybody's term. We're defining the lengths of those terms. Or actually, we were removing the lengths, but I just wanted to fix that. It occurs twice in line 110. The word length should be, the word limits should be replaced with length.
Kathy, do you have that?
I do. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thanks, Kathy. Are there any other edits to the minutes that board members wish to make? All right. Would anyone like to move the minutes as amended?
I will. I move approval of the meeting minutes from September 21, 2020 with select board member as amended.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? All right, the minutes are amended and approved. I'm just jotting a note to myself here. Now we are on to item 6, consent agenda. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda, and would anyone like to move it?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Dawn is seconding. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we've approved the consent agenda. So the reading file, board member comments and reading file contents. Any comments or questions from the board? Pat.
For question for staff, I was wondering how the signups are going for the racial equity sessions. I know that those have started to be distributed. So I'm hoping to hear that there's been some quality interest, but just wanted to get an update.
I received several RSVPs before we created basically a sign up genie for people to RSVP electronically. And so I don't know how many people have registered for that, but I'm getting an update tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Greg, would you be willing to just give us an email update when you have numbers?
Sure. Yep. Happy to.
Thank you. Andy?
I just want to make a couple of comments. I attended a couple of the sessions for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns Town Fair last week, and there were just a couple of comments I wanted to make from that. there was a select board roundtable on Tuesday morning, and one of the topics that came up is planning for town meeting. I just wanted to bring it up, the fact that the possibility of us having to do it virtually. I don't know if we've started thinking about that or what size platform we would need, because and the reason, one of the reasons I'm bringing it up is there's a question that I think needs to be asked of the VLCT, and I did bring it up during the session, but I don't know if it was recorded and if they're planning to follow up on it. Article 1 at our town meeting is always, do you approve the reports of the officers? And so if we have a virtual town meeting, my question is, do we still have to answer that question? And if so, do we then have to have a mechanism for voting online? Which is probably a much more complicated and or expensive option than just having people listen. So that's why, I think that's an important question to ask. And I'm sorry, I completely forgot to raise this question during our discussion about the charter, because if there's a requirement that we approve reports to the officers, I'm wondering if there's a way we can avoid that by adding something to our charter that says we don't have to do it. Because as I said, I think it would be a really expensive thing to have to support just to get the annual report approved. And I asked the question to VLCT staff, what happens if it doesn't get approved? There's no, I don't know what happens if it gets voted down. But anyway, that was, it's stirred the thoughts in my brain that we haven't thought about. I mean, it's 5 months away, but I don't know how long it takes to find a app, or a platform that's capable of accepting votes from a potentially much larger number of people that could attend if it's virtual. Although people may choose not to attend if we go to Australian ballot, so we have no idea where it's going to go. So anyway, that came up. The other thing that came up is a discussion about emergency management plans, and there was just a suggestion during the discussion. This was from the Vermont emergency management folks, suggesting that before the second wave hits, we do a review of our emergency management plan to see if there's anything that we need to adjust. Just a suggestion. I'm not demanding anything, but that came up. Oh yeah, and then the other thing, I was designated as the voting person during the VLCT annual meeting, and Elaine, the voting didn't work. I was able to vote for the verb meeting, but neither of the other two. It kept telling me that I had no access, and I don't know if you were attended that meeting. We didn't get quorum for most of the votes for passive because the voting system wasn't working. Although there were 80 people in the meeting, only 26 votes were showing up, and so we didn't meet quorum, so we couldn't. I don't know what the ramifications of that are, but the voting application did not work.
Yeah, I attended most of the annual meeting, but
yeah,
you
weren't a designated voter, so you didn't notice that. Right,
so,
the voting stopped working for a large number of us, and they actually started doing a voice vote in the Zoom meeting or whatever that platform was, and it was
chaotic, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a mess. So just feedback for VLCTs as they're up. I did put that into the evaluation form too. That was a problem.
We have a board in a week or so I'm sure it'll be a hot topic.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, just one more topic, and it's just a indication that there's one more session that I wasn't able to attend Friday morning that I plan to watch. They've recorded them all about racial justice in Vermont. I plan to go back and watch that one sometime this week. So, and that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. I believe Pat also attended a couple sessions, and I'd like to thank him for being our voting delegate in the policy meeting the week before. There was a lot of great sessions in VLCT Town Fair this year. I hope everybody got to take partake of some of them. I attended the racial justice one and it was outstanding, and I highly recommend. In fact, I would like to urge each one of you to watch that session. It was very important, and it detailed a lot of information about racial inequity in Vermont and how municipalities factor into that. So it was a really valuable presentation. So I wanted to point out that not this coming weekend, but the following weekend will be the Out and About in Essex program, where residents will be able to support local businesses in both the town and the village. And there will be activities, music, and discounts, I believe, or local currency to use at the different businesses. And this is a expansion of the previous Out and Open and Outside event that the village did several weeks ago. And this is courtesy of grant funding that the staff obtained, which is awesome. We'd like to have, the village is going to have a table for information at one of the locations in the downtown on that day to talk to people about questions about merger. And so it would be really great if a select board member could also be at that table to help answer questions. And I believe there will also be tables out at the Essex Experience and at the, I don't know what that little mall is called, but the mall where Cody's Irish Pub is. And so I'm hoping, I think Greg or Tammy is going to send around a poll. And ideally, if you have time during that weekend, if you could take a shift and sit at one of the tables and answer people's questions. We have a vested interest in whether the village vote passes, and we're partners in this process. And so even though this is a vote that is separate from the vote we're discussing, it's important for us to tell our story together, and it's important for us to validate each other and back each other up and answer questions together. So it's important that select board members participate. So when that date poll comes around to you, please take the time to see if you can fit it into your weekend schedule. And with thanks in advance for taking up time on your weekends. We really appreciate that. Any other comments on the reading file or comments from the board? Okay, we now have an executive session. So Andy, you're our traditional executive session motion maker. Would you be willing to do that?
Yep.
Before that, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, I'm sorry, Evan.
As I understand it, there'll be no action taken either in executive session or afterwards. So just so the audience knows.
We'll adjourn directly from the executive session?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sorry, Andy.
No worries. I move that the select board make the specific finding that general public knowledge of pending or probable civil litigation to which the public body is or may be a party would place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Vince. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, well, let's enter executive session at
There's
9.
There's another motion.
Oh, this one gets a second. Okay,
Yes.
sorry. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. I move that the select board enter into an executive session to discuss pending or probable civil litigation to which the public body is or may be a party pursuant to 1 VSA 313A1E to include the unified manager, deputy manager, community development director, zoning administrator, and town attorney.
Is there a second?
I'll second that one as well.
Thank you, Vince. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we received a link to an executive session meeting in our email, so we can depart this meeting and regroup at that link. And it's 9:12 p.m.
Have a great evening, everybody. See you next time.